Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. This is the fifth event in our speaker series, a program that was conceived to address topics that affect our community and our quality of life, and to encourage informed and engaged citizenship. This series is presented by the Hamilton-Wenham League of Women Voters in partnership with the Hamilton-Wenham Public Library and is supported in part by a grant from the Local Cultural Council, which is in turn an agency of the state. HWCAM is here tonight, and they're going to record the event for us so that you can view it later or share it with friends. Great information coming your way tonight. So, a little bit about the League. The League's mission and how this fits with the League. The League's mission is to foster an informed and engaged electorate. In short, it's to make democracy, or our government of, by, and for the people, work. Fundamental to the work of self-government is the ability of citizens to navigate the flood of information they encounter daily. Information presented from myriad points of view, with agendas driven by commercial, economic, political, and cultural power. Tonight's topic, media literacy, is a very broad one, and it's at the heart of a healthy democratic republic. It's more than just decoding the mis and disinformation that we have to wade through. Tonight is meant to give us a sense of its breadth and of its critical importance, with frameworks and resources to explore more, as individuals and as a community. We want this to be a springboard for exploring how media literacy fosters informed and engaged citizenship. Our panel has both breadth and depth, now that we're down to two, which is breadth and which is depth, of expertise in media literacy, its importance and tools and resources available, as well as the current state of affairs of media literacy education and policy. We are missing tonight, due to illness, Erin McNeil, who was really helpful putting this panel together. Erin is the CEO and founder of Media Literacy Now, which is a nonprofit advocacy organization focused on informing and driving policy change at local, state, and national levels across the U.S. to ensure that all K through 12 students learn the literacy skills they need for health, well-being, economic participation, and citizenship, to make them healthy, confident, and competent media consumers and creators. Erin's focus tonight was going to be a bit of her story as a parent and as a journalist, and what led her to founding Media Literacy Now, and then what is actually happening now and over the past 10 years in Massachusetts and nationally in either nonpartisan or bipartisan ways with legislation, policy, and curriculum. We have materials from Media Literacy Now available at the table at the back of the room, and we do encourage you to explore their work and sign up for their newsletter. It's really useful. Erin connected us with Jean LaBelle Pierce. Jean is an educator with 30 years experience in a variety of social studies subjects. She teaches history and economics. She's currently the librarian and the senior capstone project coordinator at Maynard High School. Jean collaborated closely with Erin and Media Literacy Now to measure and develop media literacy community-wide in Maynard. It was a fascinating, worthwhile report. I enjoyed reading it. Great appendix that has resulted in what can be a roadmap for a community like ours. Maynard is a similar-sized community when you put Hamilton and Wenham together. There are some copies of her report at the back of the room, of their report at the back of the room, to flip through, and we also have links to a PDF online. Dr. Paul Michailidis is a good friend of the League, whose name I continue to trip over with apologies. He has served as our Candidates Night moderator in the past, and most recently participated in our local print journalism event in this series. Paul teaches media literacy, civic media, community activism, digital media, and culture at Emerson College in Boston. Paul recently oversaw the Mapping Impactful Media Literacy project to research and design more impactful approaches for educators and practitioners building equity-driven media-based initiatives with their communities. And he's commissioned to produce a report titled Restoring Civic Health in a Culture of Distance, that highlights how media have inserted distance between people and their environments, and what we can do to reestablish meaningful relationships to the institutions that we rely on for robust civic health. And with that, I will turn to Paul and Jean to give us a background and information that they are working on, and then we'll open it up to your questions. So I hope this triggers a lot of questions because it's such a rich topic.
Thanks, MJ. Thank you.
So I'll start off tonight, and first I just want to say thank you so much for having us here tonight. I'm excited to talk about our experience in Maynard, and very excited to do it at a League of Women Voters meeting or gathering, and I think the work that you do is just so critical, and thank you for coming. So I'm going to start off because Media Literacy Now, that the organization that Erin McNeil represents, was the first person really who brought me into the fold of working more closely with media literacy. And what I love the most about the story in Maynard is that it all started with a student and her passion for understanding what this concept fake news was all about, that got us interested in working with Media Literacy Now. So I run the, Maynard is a small town, so I think you all can relate. And so a lot of times you do a lot of different jobs in a small town. And I am the librarian, and I also teach a couple of courses at the school as well. And Senior Project is our capstone project that asks seniors to complete a college level or attempt a college level research paper, an assignment that gets them to be excited about a topic that they're interested in. So there's no limit. They can choose what they like. We ask them to think about the direction they want to go in their post-high school career and try to choose a topic that might fit with that. And then there are other components where they do an internship and they do a project. And it's a great capstone experience trying to get our seniors ready for what comes next. And in 2021-2022 school year, this fantastic senior, young woman, Gracie Gilligan, said that she really wanted to understand if we could ever trust news again, right? That was her question, right? And how do we evaluate that? And as a history person, in the beginning of my career, I was excited to share that search with her and the research about it. In thinking about how to evaluate information and how to kind of establish rules to evaluate information, Gracie reached out to Media Literacy Now, and Erin McNeil was the contact person, and ultimately she ended up doing her internship with Media Literacy Now. And in that internship, they worked with Renee Hobbs from the University of Rhode Island, and Renee is a renowned scholar on media literacy now, and in media literacy, and she had been working with that same organization in Rhode Island, where they pushed out a survey to the Rhode Island school system, the whole school system. But and they found tremendous information, but it was really kind of still at the adult level. It wasn't really pushed to students. And so when Gracie read that, she thought, really, I want to create a survey that will understand what students understand about media literacy, because it's really students that are awash in all this information. They don't know how to evaluate it. So she worked with that team at Media Literacy Now and put together a student survey. And that yielded very interesting results, some really positive, that a lot of, the majority of students, by the time they graduated from our high school, believed that they understood research practices and that they understood the Bill of Rights and the protections under the Bill of Rights. I mean, so those were really great positive things, but there were a lot of things revealed about how they consume so much media and don't really get a chance to talk about that with anybody. So as she did this student survey, she came back to me, and it's always great when a student pushes back to the teacher and says, we're talking about this wrong. Media literacy, it's not just about fake news. It's about everything we consume, but everything we create as well. And we think of all the students, I think of my daughters, they're on social media way more hours than I really want to know. But they're creating things, right? Every time they put an Instagram post together, every time they put little videos together, right? Those are all content creation. And so Gracie really broadened my idea of what media literacy is. And as a librarian, certainly this is something that we're doing all the time, but what we realized is it's not, and the standards at the state level aren't very consistent, or they're kind of all over the place with language arts and computer skills, and every different part of the curriculum has some kind of media literacy skills, but nobody seems to own it. And the library is a great place to own it, right? The librarian's role is a great place to own it. So Erin and I met after Gracie's work, and we put together a plan to say, why don't we do the whole district? Like in Rhode Island, we had a lot of adults surveyed. In Maynard now, we've got these kids surveyed. But now can we just kind of have a holistic approach and push it out to the whole district? And that's what we did. And in the back there, you'll see the report that was generated from that. And again, we're a small district, so you look at some of those numbers, but you have to realize, like 500 students, there are only 360 students at our high school. So we're a small, but I think that allows us to be a really interesting test case, an experiment group, right? Because we can do this on a smaller level and then draw some larger conclusions. And with this report, again, it was revealed that there are some real strengths in our district. Definitely kids do feel like they do a lot of research and they do get some fundamentals in the training, but it revealed huge gaps in terms of not being able to talk about the images that they see, the messages that they get. There's nobody really having a conversation about these things. A lot of times they're so controversial that I think we stay away from a lot of those practices. So when we got this report, then we wrote a grant to put together a committee that would investigate this. And in the report, which is why Media Literacy Now is a great organization if any towns work with them, in the report they put a variety of recommendations together for our district, and they broke them down into the different stakeholders. And it gave us really a roadmap of how to have school leaders, I'm just going to this page if you get a chance to look at it, educators and librarians, parents and community members, public officials and philanthropic leaders, and media professionals, how to attack this issue from all the different stakeholder vantage points. And when we did that, we came together, we felt very overwhelmed. And we had, I was just saying to Paul, like, in the world of education, we produce curriculum maps, and that's the taught curriculum in different schools, and you're basing that on standards from the state. But a lot of times, there are new standards that develop or evolve, and over the last few years, math has been one of those areas where it's completely been revolutionized in standards. And when districts go through that and they have to revamp all their curriculum maps, it can get difficult to then say, now we want you to add this, right? So when we met as a smaller group, our curriculum director and myself and the other two librarians, there's only one librarian each of the, one in the elementary, one in the middle, and one at the high school, we thought we need to go for low-hanging fruit. We need to find something that we can start now, and that'll get the impetus going to make sure that across the board and through all the different grades, we're able to introduce these concepts, these really important concepts of media literacy. And I'll just tell you really quickly before I end and pass it to Paul, but what our biggest concerns, and I'll kind of read what our goals were to find ways in the curriculum that we are teaching students to evaluate the quality of information sources, to protect against harmful propaganda and disinformation, to strengthen healthy habits of using media as a lifelong learner, to develop technology skills that are valued in the workplace, right? Everybody's using these, to improve democratic decision-making, to recognize and resist stereotypes in media representations, and to unleash creativity, self-expression, and confidence, because these aren't bad things, these are great tools, but you have to go into them with deliberate understanding of the biases you bring to the table and the biases that you're witnessing and seeing out in the culture. And beyond biases too, just the influences in general and the purpose. You know, how many times are you being sold something, right, when you're looking at information? And so what we did, and what I think is so incredibly helpful for every district, is to use the Media Literacy Now Implementation Index. And what they do, and I have copies back there if people want to look at them, but they break the practice of media literacy education down into very education speak language that we know you can do even in the elementary grades. And so they have a continuum of, you know, for instance, to compare and contrast. Do students compare and contrast two different forms of media to identify similarities and differences in content, format, target audience, and point of view? So what and you can do that even in kindergarten. You can do that in first grade. It's going to look a lot different than when you're doing it as a 12th grader, but if you're deliberate and you understand that this is a practice that we're going to do, then you can kind of have that low-hanging fruit ability to infuse media literacy immediately. And so it ranges from all of that up to the high school level where you're looking at media law and policy. And so the continuum has been incredibly helpful for our district, and that's kind of our blueprint forward, and it all really kind of came out of one student's real interest in this, and then a connection with Media Literacy Now. How was that, Paul? Okay. Without Erin, we weren't quite sure the flow of how everything was going.
Yeah, well, we are picking up and doing it well, so if she was here with us. So I can just hop right in and follow up with that. So thank you. This was great to hear, and just also offer my thanks to have this time for hopefully a lively discussion. I'm really moved by kind of hearing this, and I'm reminded of a couple things, like really passionate young people can make a huge difference in the world, and that's really important to lift that up every time we hear that. I'm also reminded of both the importance of helping people develop competencies around how they navigate media and use media in the world today. And that'll be a jumping off point for a couple things that I talk about as well. And also just thank you, because the public schools is really a place where this matters. And when I hear this, you know, I hear two things, and I can just offer some background by myself, but this idea that media literacy is everywhere and it's nowhere at the same time.
Yes.
And it becomes very challenging for us to kind of have an agreed upon understanding of what does it mean when someone is able to be media fluent. So what do we focus on and what do we not focus on? And that's been some of the roadblocks I know Erin has faced with Media Literacy Now that continues to, you know, schools, as you know, and as the son and the husband of educators, there's no room left to put new things in schools. In
Right.
fact, it's almost the opposite now. We keep taking things out of schools because they're being so packed in. So when we have computer literacy and digital citizenship, it's really hard for us to figure this out. So a case like Maynard is wonderful, and hopefully it gives us some good insight here in Hamilton Wenham. So I think I just want to build off of that by offering a few remarks about my kind of some of the work, and might be helpful for us to think about in terms of our community and thinking about schools, but they're also thinking about this on a community level, especially with what we talked about, the kind of the essential important connections between a healthy local communities and healthy civic society and civic societies that have really robust local media knowledge and infrastructure, right? And we keep saying, we are on the eve of, I'm not sure if folks here probably know, but in the local news panel, we're not too far away from relaunching a local news initiative here in town called HW News. And it'll happen this spring, and it'll be a free in-print weekly that'll come to everyone's front door and then online. And doing research for this, and I think we talked about this at the last panel. This is the last anecdote, I promise, that I'll talk about. that actually shows, that without local media infrastructures, societies, there's all these really interesting statistics about voter turnout, about the tax levels, about commitment to public goods versus hoarding private goods. It's kind of fascinating. So, and that might be a good departure point to think about why media literacy matters and why this panel is really important. And why this is a challenge that we all have to face. And I want to talk first just in general, and then talk a little bit about the youth and some of the work we've done, and then also into the more communal and civic space. And I've got some prompts here. But so obviously, living in this abundant digital culture is the first, it's kind of the first thing that we see all around us. We are awash in immersive technological realities, and they're no longer choices, but it's almost that they are a necessary part of our daily lives. We almost need technology now to be able to facilitate and function for most of the things we do. And that is starting to go across all facets of life, not just for young people, but across the lifespan. The reliance on digital and mobile technologies has become essential. With young people, it's especially acute. I have 3 young children in my house, and it's that kind of digital reality has come home. And I often think about this as a really old person, that I want to help. I don't want to place my reality on them, but help navigate their reality. And there's a lot of value there. However, that being said, there are these trends that we have seen with our digital cultures. And this is where I think important around young people and mental health and social emotional health and well-being. So there's a lot of research now. Actually, the federal, I can't remember the name of the organization, but they released a report. It's going to bother me, but I'll get over it. It was a report last year, and there's actually a study that came out today that 2 things that are impacting levels of anxiety and depression with young people in particular. One is obviously heavier, unregulated use of social technologies, and the second one is, actually this is fascinating, of the feeling of being overscheduled. So that's the next biggest kind of predictor, and that one is huge for me, but it also, I think, ties into the media realities of always feeling like there are things happening that you might want to connect into. And I do think the parental need to always have the child or the youth kind of engage in things comes from the idea of always seeing from a distance. So this is really important. One reason why I think media literacy, this is where I depart a little bit from the normative kind of let's engage with media. The second part of this is, as we see outside of just the youth perspective, is distrust and civic fracturing. Those levels are at fairly all-time highs, and that's a really important thing that we have to kind of consider as well. So I feel like why media literacy it is kind of central to who we are and what we do. We have done projects. So we've been looking at this issue of mapping impactful media literacy. So looking at the connections of how media literacy can support healthy social fabric, and starting with young people. And I think the first thing that we have found is a couple things that media literacy does that we want to improve on. And this is kind of important building off of this. We do think, and research shows, that we want, from the earliest ages, young people to engage in media skill development and in savvy media being able to navigate media, be able to create and content. But we also We also find that sometimes a heavy reliance on media can force people into much more individualistic mindsets. That's one of the things that our study find, is that if we're just teaching people that media is a very personal thing, we're always on these personal devices, right? And in a sense, we start to lose the social awareness of this, not directly, but over time. And we find that if we reinforce that if you just learn media literacy skills, you'll be better prepared to do things in the world, we are reinforcing like this independence instead of interdependence. And that's one big thing we found in our mapping impactful media literacy. We also found that teaching media literacy skills without connections into the community can build as much polarization and distrust as it can more better skills. Is that you can teach people to think they're media savvy in their own technological ways or with their own realities. If you don't connect that to why it matters in a local community, they might just feel empowered to be cynical and to say, I'm right because I know this and I see it all the time. And the last part of our Mapping Impactful project, we talked about the need to have media literacies that are that connect really strong to democratic values, and that's really important. So that if young people don't see themselves as part of a community, they can't develop the agency to actually know and learn how to act. So for us, like the social media part of it that's hard, this was the last part, is that I agree that our digital realities have done a lot. They've done a ton for communities, in terms of like communities that don't find in their geographic space support. So largely marginalized communities that have been oppressed, communities that have different various abilities and disabilities, they find good connections. That's been great. But largely, the cumulative effect of social networks has been taking the, kind of an unregulated digital platform that can really cause harm and damage and put us into cycles of information. So the more we ask students to opt in without mindfulness, the harder it might be for them to find the balance between when to be on and off. And so our Mapping Impactful Media Literacy project, this was with young people. It was a national study done with young people that were in secondary high schools and into colleges. And again and again, finding that we, again and again, like the thing that mattered most for young people was to understand what they care about, why they care about it, and then to think about their media experiences in that context, instead of just saying, let's learn how to, let's learn what happens in YouTube and TikTok and these platforms, because that almost pushes them further into these spaces that have some value but also can be largely harmful. And so we started to develop this model for media literacy that was about what matters to you, why does it matter? So the media space is so abundant, we're never going to catch up with technological evolution. And frankly, like, sourcing is super important and good, and I see it in universities all the time when young people come, and it's almost like a losing battle. Like you're kind of chasing time a little bit, right? I remember some years ago when I was less old, was about grammar. It was about oh, we don't teach young people how to write anymore. And then we kind of quickly got over that. And now it's that we don't teach people how to source. And now, like with AI, we're quickly getting over that. Like colleges have started to shift away from some of that into, well, it's not going to matter because they're just going to have everything be generative and they're going to be manipulating all these. So when I look at the technologies and how fast they evolve, what our project shows is like, if we, it matters that they still learn how to do these things on the base level, but they need to build the confidence of how to be resilient and connected to their proximal and physical spaces, and learn when and how to use media to that end, because otherwise they just go into that media space and it becomes harder for them to navigate that and see a pathway through. And then, the last thing I'll say before discussions is the report that just completed on restoring civic health. This is one of it's kind of a really important one, because it really talks about when we did this research, and we did this research with young people over a couple of years, a wonderful team of students and different practitioners that were doing this research. And again, we found that the cumulative impact of media use was feeling less connected to the spaces around them, less connected to their local communities, less connected to their local environments. And that became especially acute when they were in modes of transition, like leaving for, like the times where you're most vulnerable as a young person, big transitions, leaving for higher education, moving places, that they rely more and more on media. And it's not all negative, but the cumulative impact was feeling less sense of connection, like that small insertion of distance into all the places and the things, into the people, into navigating those human relationships. And it was really kind of this restoring civic health was like a return to allowing young people to find ways for media literacy to place young people into the local spaces that they inhabit, and to re-engage in the rigors of the human condition is how we think about it, right? The ability to engage deeply in meaningful content and prioritize that as like, it's almost counterintuitive, but that media literacy returns to the human, and it's not just about looking at media and understanding how to navigate that. That is a necessary part of that, but it needs to be done in the context of your human connection, because otherwise, we have, we see media literacy growing, but we also see polarization and distrust and everything growing. So it's kind of like that grows and then we fight, and then that grows. And I do believe it's necessary, especially at young ages. But I also see school districts that I see my kids coming back, and they're allowed to just use all the Google things pretty much for nothing, but then also asked to compare and contrast. And I said, well, Google's in the schools and you're just making all these things and getting sucked into the platform. What does it mean when the students at that young age can return to those environments in the human spaces? I feel like for me, that's where it ended. So I'll just close by, I think that media literacy is so important, and I want to just lift up the work that's being done to bring it into our spaces of school, but I also, in a more of a departure for communities, so from young people all the way through to older populations, a healthy media literate society is one where communities are committed to being present with each other, build local media ecosystems that matter, and then we use that to go back and model more healthy media habits and behaviors. It might be utopian and not realistic, but maybe there's a chance. I'll let you know how my kids turn out in another decade or two. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, both of you. This is, yeah. So for me, part of when we were coming up with this topic and how we talk about it, I just kept thinking about David Foster Wallace's commencement address, "This is water." For those of you who don't know it, the two goldfish or two fish are swimming, and another fish swims by in the other direction and says, "How's the water?" And the fish look at each other like, "What's water?" It just is, right? So utopian or not, this is the air we breathe, it's the water we swim in, and it's the water that our young people are growing up in. And I desperately want to be optimistic about it. I hope you all hung on to some of this information and it percolated into questions. Does anyone have something they'd like to ask Paul or Jean?
Hi, I'd like to know if you received any pushback from the community here. Was it well accepted?
It was well accepted. I think the senior project program is really well established in that town, and it really is sort of a whole village approach. And I think the interesting student projects have had real impacts on the town. And so when there are opportunities that come around like this to use Maynard as sort of an example, and that's ultimately how I pitched it to the town. This is going to be an example that other towns may look to, and Media Literacy Now may write about and promote as an exemplar about how to start the process. I mean, not an exemplar in doing the work necessarily, right? I think we have a long way to go, but as a district that wants to do the work. And I think, so to answer the initial question, there's generally a lot of interest in the things that students do in the town because they're meaningful to the kids, and everybody loves to really see that. So they embraced it. Like I said, we have a small town, and our superintendent loved the idea, and I work closely with the public library, and they liked the idea, and the town government is really involved in a lot of our work, and so they liked the idea. So I hate to make it sound so ideal, because I'm sure there would be pushback in a lot of places, but you know, I think depending on how you define media literacy, there are different kinds of pushback, right? So if you're going to say we're tackling fake news, I mean, you're going to get certain radars set off, right? But if you're talking about, and not that we need, you know, we need to tackle that. I'm not trying to say we don't. But I think when you take it as this holistic, we need to really foster critical thinking across the board from, you know, pre-K to 12. And this is a vital area where critical thinking is so necessary, and we don't necessarily all have the training for it. And they were on board with that. I think most adults are definitely worried about the impact that social media, right, one kind of media, is having on our youth, and it tends to motivate us to do anything that we possibly can. But then you forget, well, there's all those TV shows that your kid is watching up in their room on their laptop, and you don't know what that is. And then beyond that, and this is the one that really hit me, and my children are older. I have a 19-year-old and a 22-year-old, and for them, it's just really needing to foster, and for the kids that I teach, really need to foster deep investigative skills, because for instance, they came home from their winter break, and we had to somehow go out and buy sour cherry juice. And I said, why do you need sour cherry juice? And they said, well, TikTok, you know, like it's a cure for sleeplessness, and you know, you don't want us to take melatonin, so this is like an all-natural way. He said, whoa, let's back up here a second. Like, what are you talking about? And if I get on my Amazon card, where sadly they share a credit card, oh my God.
I'm going to take a note for that.
Yes, I'm going to give you a lot, like, but there'll be a product in there, and I looked up the product that I saw in the cart the other day, and one of the things it said is it treats tattoos, and I texted my 19-year-old immediately and said, don't tell me you got a tattoo, caps. And she said, what? You're crazy. And I said, this product. And she said, oh, I saw it on TikTok. And it's really good for your skin. And so I think, wow, like we're just in a different environment that I only happen to know they're doing these things because they're on my credit card. But what happens when they're not, right? Or I don't know if you saw that New York Times magazine article about, and I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right, but zines or zins, Z-Y-N,
Yeah, the tobacco.
The tobacco,
Yeah.
like
Or
little
the
puff.
nicotine pouch.
The nicotine pouch, and you all probably, I have to say, I was surprised by that. I didn't know that. You realize there are just all these layers of pieces. This is a long answer, but I think a lot of adults are very concerned about what they don't know. And our children are kind of concerned about what they do know. We had this amazing conversation in class the other day where we were talking about the hearings where the CEOs of the social media companies were all brought before Congress. And I asked the question, you know, what can and should be done about this. And you talked about cynicism, Paul, and I see a lot of defeatism too, a sense like, there's nothing you can do about this. And then, kids were saying, I've seen people kill themselves on sites, right? Or I've seen deaths. And you realize the world that they inhabit is so frightening. And I'm not in it. I'm not surfing like they're surfing. I'm not getting exposed to the algorithms that they're getting exposed to. But I don't even necessarily know what they're seeing. And so when I ask, so what should Congress do? And they kind of laugh and say, Congress can't do anything. So,
That's a bigger.
right, no, that is a bigger,
Bigger
I think
problem.
it's this, there is this question of cynicism of, when you don't feel like you can get a full grasp on the whole thing, right? You're always, like you said, you're always behind on what you know. I feel like that worries me for kids. I do feel like part of their anxiety is based on some of that. And I don't mean to sound, you wanted optimism. There's so many wonderful things, but these are deep things that worry me when I see them or hear them.
Yeah. I mean, just even adding on to that. I mean, when we ask first-year college students about their experiences with technology, and this is a new gathering, and it's fascinating. We go through this whole thing. I teach like a discovering media. It's like a first-year seminar for a lot of students where I am, and we go through this we do this deep talk about like, what was your media life like? Like, when did you get your first phone? Tell us about the restrictions. Tell us about like how you navigated, and then we have these wonderful conversations, and you see it like obviously the trend's younger, and there's vastly different ways that households navigate technological use. But what's apparent again and again, and it's probably over 90%, don't feel positive about their media use when they were younger. They all say, if we could do it again, we wish we didn't have it that early. And that's like again and again when you hear them, when they get to that age. None of them are like, yeah, it was awesome. I loved being on Instagram when I was 12 years old. That happens. So some of them say, it didn't matter, but most of them say, it didn't make me feel great. And now I look back on it, it was awful. I was navigating, all these things. And I think, again, this is not like, I don't like to put it in, it's not in like a good or bad
Right,
bucket.
I know, I'm sorry, yeah.
But it's a new thing we're navigating. But I do think like, there are certain repercussions of all this, and why I think the media literacy angle matters, and why it should be more about how we opt in or out, accepting that these things are the reality. Is like, if we just accept, TikTok is like the most evasive, manipulative tool yet. And a lot of times we take the frame of like, how can we use TikTok? And TikTok's great. I mean, I assume it's great. It's got all these wonderful things. You can get, cures for sleeplessness. And you can do whatever you need to do on there. But the larger picture of TikTok is an algorithm that, the big part is just complacency, extracting data, and also leading us, like the YouTube algorithm has been proven again and again that the more you're on there, the more extreme. The goal is to keep you on it. So when you watch something, it gives you something that's indecipherably a little bit more to that end than and we've all done it, which is the other part of this, where you just kind of click and you see something else and you just click. And the end goal of that is just like, as long as you can stay engaged. These are techniques that are not regulated. They can be, we know again and again, but I do think like the real question is why we accept them. And I think we do because this is like the inevitability, right? And this is just the way that the world is. We can't shut this off. So then we have to go back to, but it is really interesting thinking about how we can best prepare.
Right.
And the problem with preparing is like now with all the talk about AI, and you see what that's doing to the way that young people learn, and the way that they think, and the way that manipulates reality. So we can talk about like polarization and source and factual, but if you see the new way that visual AI is working, it's not decipherable that someone can create a video of a politician here and here. And it's almost, you'd have to spend 10 minutes to accurately find the source code to decipher that. Maybe there's some cues, but it's getting that sophisticated. And in an age where we're all used to scrolling so quickly through information, it's hard to stop, right? And so that's why I think media literacy is so important. Projects where they get to go out in the world and realize how hard it is and figure out things that are meaningful matter. Because I don't know if we're gonna solve like navigating TikTok effectively. Especially when you're younger, that's what you want. You want to find the bad things on TikTok. Because when you're younger, you want to find the bad things in everything. You want to experiment, and that's just how it is.
I think the cynicism of, in part, training students to be critical consumers, critical creators. The concept that, well, there's very little you can trust, is a really difficult one. And I try to push back in my job all the time about that and say, so how do you trust something, right? What makes something trustworthy?
Right.
And because I reject the idea that there isn't a truth, I reject the idea that we can't understand the facts of a situation. And that's something I think that is a really important piece of media literacy as we work with young people who now do seem to get the message that you can't trust anybody. They're bad, everybody's bad. And that when we talk about democracy, that's a fundamental concern. And so partly what I think the significance of media literacy is yes, understanding, and I am sorry because I do still talk sourcing.
Yeah, no, it's important.
And lateral reading and practices
Yeah.
about how do you find truth, or whatever, how do you believe in things. But I think that might be the most critical skill that is optimistic, that no, there are things that we know and can prove and trust.
Right.
And so that I find a battle across the board, and that's in so many professions. I'm wearing this because I'm making sure I don't take anything to my mom who's dealing with a health crisis, but even in dealing in a hospital where facts are facts, and I'm kind of shocked by some of the things I have heard people say who are the professionals there, and that's a critical thinking process that is weak right now. It's like a muscle that's not exercised in a lot of professions.
Yeah. Did we have any other questions? Yeah.
So if you're confronted by someone who may have some information or some questionable information from social media or something like that, how do you approach them? How do you try to change their view? What's the best way? What's the best approach for?
Well, I can tell you where I start, but so I mentioned this idea of lateral reading, and if you can, so you saw this and you saw, can you tell us where this came from? Do you have any idea about who created this, right? So there are all these acronyms and tests to talk about that do talk about sourcing, but then ultimately, I try to take students to peer-reviewed literature that looks at what are the people who are expert in their field saying about any of these things. Honestly, that's what I did with my daughters about sour cherry juice, and we looked up, NIH information. Obviously there are people out there who don't trust NIH, right? And so that's a whole other element of the battle. But I think, and I'd love to hear how you would handle that, how you handle that.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, this is interesting. It's not, so we know that people's media habits are shaped by their existing beliefs and often not the other way around. So we look for information to validate our beliefs. It's not, you know, we don't go into many things and be like, oh, this is, what is that? Oh, and climate change, oh, let me read. Oh, that says one, you know, we kind of, and these things are based on who we are and our upbringing and our social environments and lived environments. And the problem with the idea about, like, you know, is that we used to have this, the difference now is not the problem, is that so in educational environments, you know, where we have this, but, you know, in general, you know, in a couple of things have made it challenging. One is that that we don't have that neat frame of information that we share. So if we're talking about disagreements, we at least have one kind of common set of ideas that we can frame it around. And now it's kind of gone so far into finding enough ideas to fill ourselves cognitively and be justified by anonymous peers without much pushback that it gets much harder for us. And that's part of the reason. So, you know, there is the lateral thinking modeling, there is the deep reasoning, you know, idea of like talking about it and then finding, you know, this in like controlled settings, you know, finding ways to really support and consider why your beliefs matter and make sure you have full information. I do think like this again goes back into, you know, we do these kind of mock debates. Obviously there's debates, but we do it in the media space too, about like trying to have, we call them difficult dialogues, right? And we set conditions for them to be healthy spaces, and then we talk through issues. And we talk about why we believe them, and then we can pause to look for information, just to give people chances to really challenge themselves on where they come from. I will say that in online spaces and in mediated spaces, it's almost impossible to do this because there's no real accountability. And that's another problem with like the heavy reliance on digital spaces. And, you know, I will say like the other part of this media literacy, like that part of it's super interesting. And the other part is, you know, a lot of the media habits of young people it's not just the schools are like, it's like all of that. It's like modeling in the home, then that translates into modeling in the schools and social modeling. So there's a lot of really effective information around how modeling at home really impacts, and it's not, you know, it's not everybody. Like I have 3 kids, 2. I think 2 that yeah. Hi, children.
The record of this.
Yeah, and they're very different, like they're just different. And you can tell they're gonna have different mediated experiences, right? But in that same way, we try to model consistently, and that's really large because that helps with, you know, that idea of like getting into those deep digital spaces. And, you know, it even just goes back to the, you know, that idea about like, where do we get our information? How do we find that? And just that healthy, like we still, like this idea about like, it's really funny, like we get print newspapers because we realize like the modeling of technology, and this is just holding on, it's not like I'm going back to it, but this is not transparent. So I can be saying I'm reading the news, but they have no idea. And, you know, my habits might not be as good as I want to model. So even just modeling something does so much to kind of help promote more healthy behavior. And that's, I think, part of the reason why more active engaged, like modeling going out to do work in the community, modeling media-based projects that have to do things. That builds, I think, habits that resonate rather than just relying on this deep digital infrastructure. If you model that as a home, where we're stuck in our homes more and our computers more, it's part of it's a reality. It's not going backwards, but it doesn't have to go backwards, and you can still build those healthy habits. So, yeah, but it's hard.
It is hard, and I think I'll speak for the membership of the league, and the reason we do things like this, we are trying to model engagement. We're trying to build opportunities for people to come together and have these conversations, unmediated, offline, because even in our small community, you get a lot of divisiveness, a lot of polarizing, and you know, I struggle with how we model media literacy and how we model good media consumption and creation habits in a way that is apolitical enough to cross that divide, and not just, Nancy, you asked about pushback, and Jean, you spoke very well about pushback. You know, once you hear media literacy, we're gonna, you know, help you figure out how to consume media, there's an immediate, like you said, flags go up. Wait, what side are you on?
Yeah.
Before you do this, I need to know what side you're on. Can it be apolitical? Can we keep it?
Well, one of the things that I liked about the survey, and that it opens the door for work that we haven't done yet, but that we all recognize is the most significant, which is in the home. And, you know, surveying parents, like how often do you discuss movies or videos together? So it doesn't have to be, you know, do you watch MSNBC or Fox News, right? Like, it doesn't have to be an immediate, you know, explosive question, right? But just in that, like in terms of balance, like asking, do you balance, how often do you balance choices of online and offline activities? And gaming is such a huge piece, right? Like, and that takes so many students spend hours after school just talking to one another, playing video games, right? And the content of those video games. So here's their social activity, but not necessarily critically thinking about the images they see, the language that they're using, just the nature of that relationship with a friend is disconcerting. And I think that these conversations are not political. They're family-based. They're really ultimate. I mean, they could be political, right? But like the fact that it just asks us to be more deliberate in all of the consumption that we have. And that seems to be a good to lay a foundation for, well, how do you then critique messaging, right? Or how do you, and a big one to me is really like, how do you identify when you're being marketed to, right? And you don't necessarily know that you're being marketed to. It's interesting because this kind of blew my mind. The elementary school librarian was talking about the requests. So at the holidays, she puts out, I don't know how she does it, little piece of paper or whatever, and asks the students to, you know, what would you like the library to get? And when she looked at them this year, she could trace every one of them back to YouTube, and like a slime channel, right? Like, so, like kids love to watch things get slimed, and it seems innocuous, right? But it's pushing information to that. It's pushing an agenda. It's pushing products, and those were the things. So she kind of came to our meeting of media literacy subcommittee and like said,
Yeah.
I don't even know where to start on some of that.
I would just like to eradicate slime. Talk about
Well, you could watch the Nickelodeon
Oh,
Super
my
Bowl, right?
goodness,
That
slime.
slimed all the players.
every rug and couch in the house.
But slime is there in,
Yeah.
right?
Do we have any other questions?
So, and Brian touched on this a little bit, sometimes when you're having a conversation and people make these statements, and your gut reaction like, you know, did you know avocados, when you eat them, you turn purple, you know, stuff like that, and it's like, and I'm actually, I have a science background, so it's really hard for me not to say, you stupid idiot. You can't say that. And some of these things that folks I've known one is that you have to have salt on your eggs. Like it was this authority truism. And it's like, no, Ma, you want salt on your eggs. And so it's very hard to, you want to be polite and kind, and you want to, media literacy in adults to me is just as important, and because my kids are in their 20s and they seem to be doing pretty good. I'm very
Yeah.
happy about it. But
Yeah.
it's the adults
Yeah.
that I
You know-
have some concern, because they don't have that Boston Globe or New York
Yeah.
Times anymore.
The media,
We do have them, it's in a different format now.
that's it's such a good reminder, not the salt part, I did agree. But it's a good reminder because, there's been recent studies that show like the lowest levels of media literacy are not young. Young people are actually far more media savvy. Like if you think about content creation, their ability to navigate
Yeah.
multiple platforms, their ability to be resourceful. And, a lot of people, like, we lament, like, oh, they don't have to be independent because they're looking at, there's like, they are navigating so much more information than generations before them, and they're doing it fluidly. So there's like a lot that like, but I don't even know how to say older generations, not old, just older generations, not young people. No, everyone in here is beautiful and young, but, older generations, that they have actually the lowest levels because all of these new technologies come out and they're so advanced and they're in different platforms, and it's much harder to adapt to those. It's like looking at like video game. If you look at like the first Nintendo, there were 2 buttons and a thing. And now when you look at the PS 90, whatever it is, and you go to, one of my son's friends and there's like 40 buttons. And I'm like, I just want to throw the football. And I can't figure the button out. And it's just, and it makes me, and then I can't lose to him. I have to teach him a lesson. So then I just do research on my phone and figure it out. But I do think, that is, part of it is that this is not new. Like I also think it's important for us to remember that someone's always had a thought about an avocado that's going to turn a different color, and someone's always had like political like misinformation and all like just these things have been around since the dawn of time. It's not like the technology invented them. All that's happened is it has created a level of publicness that it's all out there and it's all accessible, and there's such an abundance of it that we know that it creates we know that that's out there, and that creates, I actually think young people are really good at navigating sources and information. I see it in college all the time. They're using it purposefully to build agendas, but they're not like, a lot of them are not just going and being like, oh, this politician said that, or this person said that, right? There are levels of that. What I notice is just the sheer abundance of time spent and the norms with which the tools dictate information used creates different realities. It doesn't allow for deep dialogue. It doesn't allow for a lot of reason. We have limited cognition, and we know that the easier things, it's always easier to do the thing that's that quick hit to us, and that is the scroll, or that, and as long as technologies stay unregulated and mobile phone adoption continues. I coach a lot of youth sports, and we have to have policies for 3rd grade teams now to not have smartphones. It's kind of nuts. That didn't happen before. As long as that continues to be the norm, it will continue just to reshape that capacity, and that will dictate the new norm. But I definitely see, it definitely leads to less ability to have that deep reason conversation, more anxiety, less ability to sit. But it'll also open up new opportunities, like you said, creative expression, content creation. It just really, for me, it's just about how that's directed and pointed, and that's important.
I just wanted to tell a little story kind of to back up what Paul said. My son is a big gamer, and I asked him a few years ago, he's now 27, I think. I said, well, 20, no. I asked him, can you remember the first time you saw his favorite game Zelda, Legend of Zelda. Do you remember the first time you saw that? He said, oh yes, I was 7 or 8. I said, well, what did you think? He said, I thought it was the coolest thing I ever saw. So, and my immediate reaction as it came right out was, really that? And I immediately flashed back in my own head. I'm of an age old enough to remember when the Beatles first came on at Sullivan.
Hmm.
And my father, we all watched it together, black and white TV. And he looked at me and said, what'd you think of that? I think that's the coolest thing. And his reaction was, really that? So,
Interesting, yeah.
you know, it's just, this is new, I get it, it's
Yeah.
completely unique. But on we go with the generational changes,
Yeah.
and they're gonna have to figure it out, we're all gonna have to figure it out.
Right. I just want to add one thing that you made me think of that is super interesting about this. Like, it's not, if you think about, that, we oftentimes ask the schools to solve for the problems that, we find deficient, and then we yell at the schools because they can't do it. That's a kind of the norm that happens. And, there was this great, the modeling in the home is, you made me kind of think back to that, the family moments and the shared moments of connection, right? And even if it's around immediate experience, having that shared thing instead of everyone on their own device. The reason, they did this work on the reason why, because we've been doing this, the Mapping Impactful model, we have a field guide that we're giving out to educators around the country now. There were two main reasons that youth adoption with technologies has grown so much without a lot of monitoring. And number one is the fear of physical, isolate, the fear of your child getting lost, the fear of your child getting into physical trouble is number one. So that's the number one reason why parents signal early adoption, is that and this is also unhealthy, tracing your child, that to me, that's what I'm now in, there's the thing you can do, and you never not know where they are, which, that's a whole nother session that the League of Voters should do. And then the second one was fear of social stature. So the complete exposure of parental generations of that feeling of seeing everything awesome for everybody else in the media, and this is whatever medium you cross, the exaggeration of our, the idea that everyone's doing amazing things all the time, puts a lot of pressure on them to see their child's own maturation through doing awesome things all the time. And part of that was if they don't have this, they're going to be left out. They're going to be socially isolated. And to me, if we think back to media literacy, I really think at those younger formative stages, it's more about those decisions. And as a society, those things are things we can highlight rather than it is just teaching is important, but if in the home if everyone's on YouTube all the time, there's only so much you're going to do in that time in the classroom it will be effective, but to me, that's a huge part of it. So we always look to the young people to say, oh, they don't care, and they're this. Actually, you know what? They've probably been brought up in a space where they've been given these things without much, with good intentions.
Without bumpers, yeah. That is about all the time that we have. Is there anything we didn't ask or that you want to share with us, Paul or Jean? A closing thought? Are you good?
I want to know about the salt and the eggs.
The
That's-
salt
I
and the
do that
eggs.
all the time. I hope it's not a bad thing, 'cause I love a good hard-boiled egg with some salt. No, I'm just joking.
Read something in the newspaper in Florida. She was born in 1924, and Dr. Spock was
Yeah,
everything.
Gospel,
She
yeah.
That was the gospel.
Difficult to question authority. My father was just the opposite. He questioned everything. That's why I'm so wacky. But that was what she would, and that was an example. She would do these things not like they were her own opinion.
yeah.
It was a confidence
Yeah.
thing. It's like, you have to have salt in the
Yeah.
eggs. So the fact I'm shaking, because by that time she knew salt was not supposed to be that good for you,
Yeah.
even in her generation.
Sure.
and that was her justification for taking the salt on the eggs.
Well, I wanna just end by just thanking, what you said back to like we always say this about community gatherings, it's not the size, it's the strength, and having the space to have conversations like this is where where ideas start and become sustained. So I just really, double down on making commitments to be a participant in these in town and to whenever I can as audience or not. And I feel like that's one of the things for me, like the first part of our field guide is this whole thing on where do I stand? And that has you do a whole checkup in terms of who you are, what your resources are, where do you stand in terms of how often you do this and where you go there. And everyone has to go through this self-audit. And you realize how many people have a lot of good ideas, but don't actually, and the amount of time they act on them is like this. And this is really important. So just
Yeah,
thank you
well,
for that.
thank you. And something that I was rereading our notes from our initial conversation on this, Paul, and that's something that really stuck with me, and I'm totally paraphrasing, but this isn't something that we should look at through a lens of dumb citizens or uninformed or uneducated citizens. It's something we need to look at through a lens of connection and engagement and thoughtful conversation. So being present. So I appreciate both of you for sharing with us tonight. We have a couple of handouts in the back. As Jean mentioned, the Maynard Community Report is back there. We have a flyer from Media Literacy Now, which talks about, what their objectives and priorities are. So grab one of those on your way out. And then, like we said, this is a jumping off point. This is a huge, huge field. We put together a couple of infographics from an organization called News Literacy. Is it legit? 5 steps for vetting a news source, so some real sort of tactical stuff. Breaking news checklist. I mean, we live in this 24/7 breaking news story, and goodness knows the story changes minute to minute. We also have more links here. There's a QR code to get to the page on our website where these links are, but some people prefer paper. Next up, we have water resources and conservation, another great relevant topic as we head into growing season and our inevitable water bans. So that's the 28th of March, back here. Our 6th annual Civics Bee is coming up in March 13th. So team sign up will open right after February vacation. Next week is February vacation for the kids, and you can always learn more on our website, lwvhw.org. Words would be easier than letters, but and then just a final ask, please consider joining the league or financially supporting our work. We couldn't do this without all of you and without your help. So thank you again to the library, the local cultural council, HWCAM, our panelists, and all of you for coming out tonight. And know you can make an impact. Thank you.